To stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
Dawn Lester, thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Gary. I really appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to this. So Brendan, our dear friend Brendan in the United States, recommended you to me. So I looked you up and we had a chat. Mm-hmm. You've written a book called What Really Makes You Ill.
It is, yes. That's what it's called.
So immediately I thought, okay, you're up against a big paradigm here, aren't you? There's a lot of so-called evidence and data and empirical science that goes before you, which puts forward why we get ill. Mm-hmm. So I looked it up and did a bit of research, because obviously it's not my field. And so for those that are watching, if it's all right, I'd just like to go through what people say, and then you can show me where the holes are in all of that. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so germ theory. I made some notes. Germ theory of disease, proposed by scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, states that many diseases are caused by microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. While this theory is widely accepted in the scientific community and has led to significant advancements in medicine and public health, there are still some alternative viewpoints and arguments against it. Here are some of the main arguments. The terrain theory. One of the primary alternatives to germ theory is terrain theory, which suggests that the internal environment of the body, the terrain, determines susceptibility to disease rather than the presence of specific pathogens. According to this theory, if the body's terrain is healthy and balanced, it can resist pathogens and maintain health even when exposed to them. Let's start there. What do you say to that?
Right, okay. There's lots to say. First of all, germ theory is more, it should be better described as a hypothesis, because to get to actually a stage of being called a theory, something has to have gone through certain stages. And in fact, when you start looking at the scientific evidence, it's not the mainstream scientific evidence. When you start looking historically, there is no evidence to support the idea that the hypothesis that these so-called microorganisms cause disease, that's not actually been proven or substantiated to the point where it becomes a theory.
You mean more than a theory?
No, it's less,
something that's accepted.
No, it's a hypothesis is before the theory. The hypothesis starts first. So the scientific method starts with observation of a natural phenomenon. So, if you see something and you say, I wonder what causes that, propose a hypothesis. Somebody's been ill, somebody's ill, people are ill in the same space. I wonder what causes it. What about these things called germs? So that's the hypothesis. Then the next steps are to go through various procedures to actually discover if that hypothesis has any sort of validity.
What are those procedures, Dawn?
Right. Well, in the scientific method, there needs to be an independent variable, which is whatever it is that's alleged to cause something or other, or to be the factor, that can then be changed, that can then be manipulated in various ways to see if it can actually, if it does what it's said to do. So it has to be something that can be identified. And this is where the whole isolation argument comes in, because in order to say something causes something.
Let me go back a minute, because I think I'm confused. So I think I want to think about people watching it. Independent variable. What does that mean?
That means something that can be identified and shown to be something that actually has an effect in the real world, in the actual phenomenon that you're observing.
Give me an example.
Well, in the case of the germ theory, it's these germs. They're the independent, so they should be able to have this thing that they call a germ. And I go back to the idea that it's a microorganism in the first place. So they can then say, well, here's this germ, and we hypothesize that this is the cause of X, Y, and Z. So they can do various experiments using this independent variable that can either be introduced or not introduced. So they can compare the results.
Experimental infection studies.
Well, yes, experimental studies to see if infection actually is a real phenomenon. So again, they need to have the actual article that they think is the cause. They need to have the actual thing that they're saying is the cause. They need to be able to observe that. They need to have that isolated on its own, so that they can introduce it or withhold it, and then see the and then compare the results.
And those studies have been done, right?
Not exactly in the way that
tell me, because I know that those studies have been done, and that they take what they think would be the bug, and they introduce it to animals and humans and see if they get infected in double-blind randomized trials, and and statistically they say that those germs that they introduce to those people infects them and makes them sick and gives them these group of symptoms. What do you say that's wrong with that argument or that experiment? Where's the holes?
The hole is that they don't actually have the isolated thing in the first place that they're saying is the cause. Because in order to be able to determine if something causes something, you have to have the thing in the first place. You have to know it exists. So if you're saying that... I can't think of something, but saying that this germ causes something, you have to have it completely isolated on its own to see.
They don't do that then?
They have studies and experiments that they call isolation, but the standard definition or the accepted definition of isolation is having something completely on its own without anything else.
Right.
Yes. Okay. That's the standard view of isolation. Okay. If you're isolated, there's you on your own and nothing else around you.
So parasites come under the definition of germs like viruses and bacteria? I mean, I know a parasite is something that lives off something else, and it's on a host, and then so if you get infected by a parasite, it either treats you as the host or it's already on a host, like a worm or something, and then that parasite can give you. According to their theory, parasites are usually included under the heading of germs. Germ theory.
Under this blanket description of germs, so parasites are usually included. But the definition that you described before talks about microorganisms.
Yes.
And a virus, and microorganism means by definition something that's living. Yes, and viruses have never been proved to be or not alive. They are accepted as not being alive.
I was told years ago there's something like in between life and crystal life. Is that right?
Yes, they're kind of making some...
They grow like crystals, but they're not quite crystals and they're not quite... Is that right?
This is a problem. No, that's not been proven to be the case because these particles that are called viruses have never been... seen in isolation, completely on their own, separated from everything else. And this is where the big problem lies, because in their scientific experiments, they don't isolate the virus and introduce that completely on its own. What they do is they take some kind of fluid lung sample, whatever, from a sick person, and that goop that they take from the person is then introduced into an experiment that's got a whole load of other components, including vero cells, which are monkey kidney cells. They then introduce all kinds of things like fetal bovine serum. They introduce gentamicin,
so you're saying that they put, like for vaccines? You're talking now.
Well, no,
or
this
for
is
testing?
this is the virology experiment in the first place. So they have a petri dish. So they put the
Yeah.
goop that they've got the sample from the sick person. They add
So
all these other things.
hang on a minute. Hang on. Sorry, Don. So just to be clear, you're talking about the identification stage now of identifying a particular virus or germ, or are we further down the line with trying to diagnose? Well, that's the same thing, isn't it?
This is what they call their isolation studies. This is what they call isolation. So they don't isolate in the true sense of the word that we understand it. They don't actually ever find the so-called virus on its own and introduce that completely on its own in its isolated state.
Okay.
They only ever have it mixed up with the rest
with
of
other
the
stuff.
With
and
other stuff.
So it could be the other stuff that's causing the problem. Is one theory?
That is the point.
Okay.
That's never tested.
Is there a difference between? So so when they're testing for these things, these microorganisms, let's say, is there a difference between a bacteria, a virus, a parasite, and what was the other thing I said? I can't remember. What I put
fungi, probably.
Fungi, yeah.
Yes.
Is there? I mean.
Yes.
I mean, and when I say difference, I don't mean I know there's a difference between them, but is there like a difference between that? Some of those, like you say, we can't say that that's responsible, or all of those fall under that category because they're mixed with other things, or is it possible that a fungi might affect you under some circumstances, or a parasite might under other circumstances? Clear that up for me.
No, none of these organisms, or which again, viruses isn't an organism, but none of them have been proven to be the cause of any disease. There is none of them. There's no evidence. There are reasons that the body produces symptoms, and symptoms are what are then given the label of disease. But that's a complete misunderstanding of how the body functions, which is that we don't get diseases. The body produces symptoms, and this is where it moves into what's called terrain theory. Only, strictly speaking, terrain is not a theory. And I would also say that the terrain theory explanation that you read out before from the mainstream is not that the body's immune system fights off pathogens, because there aren't any pathogens in the first place. And that, of course, is the big shift.
So that's where the beachhead is. The beachhead is where they say there's pathogens. They've tested for them by using their various methods, which are, let's go through my notes on those.
They're indirect methods. They are not direct methods. That's the point. These are indirect methods, and they jump to they make conclusions. And this goes back to, it sort of goes back to Pasteur, but and Robert Koch, and just their whole idea that what they were doing proved that there was something that they had in their experiments that was the cause of these so-called conditions. And when you start looking at their experiments, what they were doing was torturing animals in these various different experiments, and nothing that they were doing can be taken as evidence that they proved transmission. I mean, they were just doing horrendous experiments where they were grinding up all kinds of nasty stuff taken from ill people or from other ill animals or something or other, grinding them up and then injecting them into their brains, and then saying, look, the monkey's ill, or the monkeys have died, or rabbits, whatever the animals they're using. And they say, it must have been a virus. And go, no.
But they don't do that today, though, right? That's more refined now compared to the 17th century.
Well,
no?
Yes. I mean, they still torture animals in these experiments because they're using monkey kidney cells, which are what they call vero cells, and that's the medium on which they supposedly growing these different cultures. But viruses don't grow anyway because they've never been proven to be living entities.
They replicate, though, like crystals, don't they?
No,
they don't replicate.
What they're calling virus. Now, again, this is how they kind of twist language, because the original meaning of the word virus, it's a Latin word, and the original meaning is poison. or some kind of noxious substance. So that's the original meaning, and then they've adapted it, which is a polite way of putting it. They've adapted it to actually mean these little particles. But these little particles are never found in the fluids of a sick person. They're only found as a result of these so-called isolation experiments, and they're only observed after all these different experiments have been done. They then take part of this substance that they call isolate and then do all kinds of techniques to it, including sort of freezing and heating and all kinds of things, and then they take a slice of it, put it under the electron microscope, beam all kinds of heavy metals at it, and then the images that we've seen over the last few years of all these little, if they're black and white images, these little circles, and there's a little arrow going, oh, that's the virus. No, it's not. It's just a little circle under an electron microscope.
It's a complete fraud?
Basically, yes.
Globally?
Yes. There are plenty of people who are now saying that virology is pseudoscience, because these little circles that they call viruses have never been seen in the wild, as it were. They have never been observed to exist anywhere. Now, we know bacteria do exist. They are living entities. They are living organisms. Fungi exist, and some
I know
parasites.
fungi exist. I'm a big fan of fungi.
Yes. And some parasites exist. And again, there may be some where there's a little bit of a kind of, grey area, but parasites exist, like you're saying, sort of worms or whatever. But again, they don't invade the body and cause people to be ill. They only find their environment, they find the right terrain to do the job that they're meant to do. Now, in the wild, fungi break down dead and dying matter. Worms tend to break down dead and dying matter, and bacteria do the same thing as well. I mean, there's all kinds of uses for bacteria to do what they call bioremediation. So they're used for clearing all kinds of toxins, because they process the various substances and break them down into their component parts to be then reintroduced into the wild. In the same way, something that's dead will be broken down by all these different organisms and then returned to the earth. Otherwise, we'd be miles high in dead bodies and
we got
dead
the
everything.
microbiome in our gut, which is becoming more and more understood. It's still a large area where they're learning. I think, what's his name, Tim? I can't remember his second name. The guy that runs this Zoe project. Have you heard about this? Where
no.
So he was a virologist, I believe, or an epidemiologist. I can't quite remember. And he was studying why people were getting ill, and come on, what we eat and what's going on in the stomach. And I've seen him give a few podcasts, and he talks about giving presentations about the necessity of having a very healthy gut microbiome, a good balance of bacteria that's going to, do its job in our guts. Excuse me. And he got private funding to rather than it be sort of like a university funding where money comes from usually big corporations that produce, the food that's obviously had some sort of influence on what gets researched and what doesn't. I don't think that's in dispute with regards to the way universities have been funded scientifically to do research and stuff. So we've largely been ignorant. There have been seen as fringe people that were saying this stuff years ago, that some of the stuff we're eating is not good for us, and we think it's causing some illnesses and so on. And they were sort of pushed to one side as conspiracy theorists as they were. So, but then I think it's about 2000. I think it's about 20 years now, 2008 or something. This guy managed to get some private funding to say, okay, let's monitor people with they put some sort of thing on their arm that sort of plugs in, and then it monitors their blood sugar, and they've got an app. And they take a stool sample and they eat a muffin to see how it goes through their digestive system. They send it in, and they get they get told that they're a sort of their body metabolizes in a certain way, and that they should work on a diet that contains obviously less carbohydrates, sugars, and no processed food, and lots of plants and vegetables, and so on and so forth, and build up a healthy microbiome. And they're finding that they've got such a data set now, because people have signed up for this program, that it's the biggest study that could have never been done with any university grant. And the data that's coming in from this is showing that, having a healthy bacteria colony living with us. So there's these bacteria that we live in a symbiotic relationship. I don't think that's in doubt, is it? Not by you, right? You don't.
No.
You agree with that?
Yeah, bacteria definitely live in and on our bodies, and they are really important, and we need all of them. And so in Devon right now, we've got this cryptosporidium outbreak with water, which we know the water companies have been dumping raw sewage into the water supply, because they're feeding the the shareholders in other countries. I can't remember who owns our water now. I think it's an Australian pension company, or it's Wall Street or somebody. We don't own it anyway, and so they don't care about us, right? So they're pumping raw sewage in. So cryptosporidium's got into the water supply, and people are sick. How do you sit with that? It's a parasite, it's a germ, it comes under the thing of a microorganism, and it's making people sick, and they get certain kinds of symptoms. Is that happening or not in your view? Right. First of all, let me clarify. I am not denying that people get sick. Absolutely not. 100%. Okay. People do get sick. What I am saying is it's got nothing to do with cryptosporidium.
Really?
Because
Tell me. I'm really curious to know how, because they've used all these tests, haven't they? They've done what they do to us. They've looked under a microscope, and they've isolated this thing, and they've done all these things that you said doesn't happen, and they're telling the public right now, don't drink the water.
Well, there's something in the water. I'm not denying that either. There's something in the water that is not good, and the fact that there's sewage going out into the water is not healthy, obviously, but it's not the bacteria or the parasite or whatever it is, because all they're doing is finding something and then blaming that, and there's that sort of, so many people, the standard thing of using the fireman at the scene of a fire. If you go to a fire, you see firemen, and you go, oh, it's like saying...
Correlation, firemen's cause fires.
The firemen are seen there, and they go, oh, okay, that's an assumption. It's not proven, because there's another cause. And in almost all cases, it's very rare. It's almost all cases that there will always be a great combination of a great many factors that are involved in whatever's causing the illness. Now, because of what's going on, or what's been going on for the last 4 years, they've been ramping up the whole kind of infectious disease and transmission and that kind of thing for a long time, but they started ramping it up in the beginning of 2020 when they rolled out this nonsense. And they're obviously really trying to keep it ramped up to get everyone scared, and so they're bringing out all these different stories. And as I say, I'm not denying people are ill. What I'm saying is that there's no evidence for what they allege is the cause. So we've got this. Well, it's part of the agenda, and the 2030 agenda. The goal number 3 is to do with health and well-being. It's nothing to do with health. It's really to try and get everyone what they call fair access to vaccines and medicines for all. So they want everyone to have access in the name of these medicines and vaccines being what's called our health.
No, we're making a leap now, though.
So this is okay. So
there's a leap.
Yes, okay. There's a leap.
Yeah. So I get you. I get where you're coming from, what you're saying. But
we can go back to that.
I'm thinking about the people who are watching the podcast. We've made a leap from there's a big conspiracy, and they're trying to sell us down this road. But let's go back to some of the getting the ground roots of why that doesn't work and why they're wrong about viruses and bacteria and stuff. If that's all right with you, to get
sure.
Because I'm just thinking of the listeners. If we make that leap to the pandemic and what's all been done with the pandemic and what people are saying about the pandemic and stuff. We might be jumping ahead of ourselves before. I just want to.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's just connecting dots because why is there just this one so-called outbreak? Well, it's because there is this sort of general push to make people afraid of these so-called germs. That's the point, and so that's why the stories. But we'll go back to the basics.
I haven't got a problem with people taking advantage of certain situations and stuff like this. There's once we get down that road, we can examine it in more detail for what But I just want to stay on this.
Yeah, sure.
The reason for so help me out with disputing the ways that they put forward the evidence for the germ theory or the microorganism theory first. Let's put that to bed. So that you can make your case for that, because I want to understand.
Okay.
Microscopic observations. What's wrong with seeing these things individually under a microscope, like Cryptosporidium?
Well, they can actually observe bacteria, and yes, they've seen them, and there are different, supposedly different forms. But I'll put that to one side as well.
Yeah, let's just keep it simple with.
Yeah. No, I will do. I'll come back to that. That's why I just make a note so I remember. So they observe these bacteria in their various different forms, and they see it. And exactly as you said, it's correlation. The correlation does not prove causation.
So if they take that Cryptosporidium and they put it in some samples and they give it in a double-blind test to some people and not others, and then afterwards look at the data and find that the people that were given that were statistically more sick with those symptoms and the others weren't, what's wrong with that outcome?
Well, I would have a look at those study papers where they say they are introducing the bacteria to see if they are introducing them in their isolated state, right, or whether they are introducing them with a whole load of other substances.
Okay, and your argument is that they always introduce them with something else.
I can't make such a blanket statement because I haven't studied every single one of the thousands of studies. So I'm going to be, but generally, no, they don't. They don't introduce the actual isolated bacterium. Now, what I can do if people are finding this a little bit hard, which is understandable, because I mean it's just. It takes.
Yeah, we're talking about virology and epidemiology, and there's so many people who don't even know what that means, and you've got to look it up, haven't you? So. Yes,
I mean epidemiology is really just kind of a general way of looking at mainly correlations of the circumstances of why people in a particular area may be more ill than elsewhere. Now, there's some usefulness in all of that, because if they're looking at the environment and they're looking at what is, and if there's anything particular in the environment that's different from other environments, if they're then doing a comparison, they might be able to see something that's relevant. And this is where, if you like, the sort of, say terrain is not really a theory, but the terrain model is that people who live in contaminated environments are more likely to be ill, and that's where the true empirical evidence lies. Now, just to give some background,
sure, to
give some context, in the so-called they call it Spanish flu, but the 1918 flu, or what's called 1918 flu, there were supposedly millions of people who were ill at the same time. And in 1919, I think it was Boston University, there were a number of experiments that were conducted where they were trying to get some evidence of transmission. So they were putting people who were sick with people who were healthy, and they were just trying all kinds of ways of, so they had sick men coughing in the faces of these healthy men. They were sort of injecting all kinds of bodily fluids and whatever into the noses and mouths and whatever of the healthy people. It sounds pretty crude, but it's out there. It's called the Rosenauer experiments. People can look it up. There's evidence out there as long as it's still around. But I can provide you with some
send me a link for that, and I'll put that in the links to the description.
Yes, there's I mean, there's a particular article that's actually published in the mainstream, but there's still a section where it shows that they tried and they couldn't prove transmission. So what happened was that they were expecting to be able to prove it, and the guy who ran it was expecting, I mean, he was assuming, so he was on the kind of germ side, and he found, or his conclusion was that if anything, what they'd learned from those experiments is that they didn't actually know about disease and how it's transmitted. Now, I know you can say, oh, well, that was 100 years ago. At the same time, the germ theory is based on something that's even older. So it's based on the so-called experiments of Robert Koch and Louis Pasteur. So that was somewhat earlier than the 1918 flu and these experiments. So people say, oh, well, it's 100 years ago. Well, yes, and the original theory is even older, and it still remains unproven. And so many experiments have been conducted over the decades, over the years, looking for evidence of this transmission, of trying to transmit whatever it is, trying to transmit diseases from one person to another.
So that's where I get confused. That's where I get my head goes fuzzy.
Okay.
And that's when I have to go back a little bit and say, okay, so from the 17th century, I remember reading in university that Descartes' era, I can't remember who it was, they talked about us being automata, and they thought that the heart was like a steam engine, and they had all these kinds of notions of what we were as human beings, and you go, oh God, poor souls, they were totally naive and ignorant, right? We're not there anymore, right? We've got modern science, and we've got proper empirical evidence and peer-reviewed papers, and people that have verified this, around the world and so on, and so we're not in that sort of what we would say sort of naive, primitive area anymore of the 17th century of when these these theories came out. We're a few hundred years down the line. How is it that we're still getting it so wrong 200, 300 years later?
Because to a certain extent, that model of the human body still exists and has been reinforced by the idea that there's sort of separate parts. Our body's made up of separate parts, and so they have all these specialists in these different areas. So you have a heart specialist, you have a brain specialist, you have liver specialist, you have whatever different parts of the body, and they specialize in that area, but they don't necessarily see the body as interconnected, and it is interconnected. You can't affect one part of the body without the rest of the body being affected.
I watched a podcast the other day with Gabor Mate, the psychiatrist.
I know him.
And he was going I love him too. He goes a stage further than what you've just said in that he says most medics today don't really understand the mental and emotional impact of what makes you sick. And so when somebody presents to them with a set of symptoms, they might say, oh, okay, you need to take this medication to treat that physical thing that's wrong with that where it's manifested. But they don't say, so what's going on with you at the moment? And find out that the guy's, got some sort of big thing going on emotionally with his life, which is compromising his immune system and making him sick, right? So for a long time... Well,
I wasn't going to go down there because you were kind of wanted to keep it here. I was we can go there.
I'm coming back. I'm coming back, right? Because I wanted to say, I'm with you with the whole body thing, right? But that still doesn't take me away from, antibiotics, for example. Before people discovered antibiotics, if you cut your finger, you could die because something got inside you and infected you.
That's the theory.
Well, it seems to be more than a theory with antibiotics. I mean, they've been overused now, and they've been given just because there's been a whole industry behind them, and they were pushed by doctors, and then they realised. I remember going through that period where you go to your doctor with a cold, and take these antibiotics because the drug companies were pushing them, right? And then they realised, oh shit, we're creating superbugs now because those few bacteria that are resistant multiply, and then we've got no antibiotics to get rid of them bad boys, right? And I get that. it makes sense to me. Like domestos kills 99.9% of germs, so there's that 0.1 that doesn't get killed, and you go, they multiply. We've got stuff we can't deal with. What you say that's not the case? Tell me. Explain. Tell me how.
Because bacteria live in our body. Our bodies are their natural habitat. We need them.
But that's the good bad bacteria, isn't it?
There's no evidence that bacteria are bad. Now, they may proliferate, but that's because they're doing their job in an area of the body or in certain tissues that's seriously compromised and damaged in some way. So the bacteria go along to clean up and repair the damage and they clean away the sort of the dead and dying cells, kind of move them out of the body. So that's the reason they're found in diseased tissue, because they're doing their job of cleaning up. Again, it's the firemen. Think of them as the firemen. The fire is caused by something else. They're there to do the cleaning up and to put okay, let's not go too far with the fire analogy, but they're there to do the cleanup. They're there to help the body. So if
I cut my finger. Mm-hmm. And I don't put antiseptic on it, and it's a bad, it's a bad cut, and I'm not keeping it free from bugs.
The bugs aren't the problem.
The bugs aren't the problem. So what gives me the septic shock or the septic blood, or what makes it go septic?
That would, first of all, when you say septic, if you cut yourself, mm-hmm. the body will respond by increasing the blood supply to that, which is why it goes red. It's not because it's infected.
It causes inflammation.
It's not infected. It's inflamed because
which is good inflammation, right?
It's just good inflammation because the body is sending blood and in sort of extra blood, and in that extra blood there are repair materials. So that's why you want to keep it kind of clean, which means clean from any kind of antiseptic stuff. So you obviously, if it's outside and there's some dirt, you want to get the dirt out of it, because that otherwise the body will then produce like the pus, which will just isolate it out. But even the pus isn't something bad. It's just that's the body putting the toxins or whatever it is into a little kind of package, and then it'll burst and that'll come out, and then the healing will carry on. So the body is capable of healing itself. Now, obviously, there are different levels of cut, different seriousness. So if you've got a really serious cut, mm-hmm. you might want to cover it up because it's like blood everywhere. But you certainly want to get it clean. So running it under the tap, although you might want to be careful. Again, who knows what's coming out of the tap. But you certainly want to remove any toxins. But it's not, again, this is the whole language thing. It's not infected. It is inflamed because the body is carrying out healing. Now, if you don't use any kind of antiseptic, and your body is in a good, healthy state, you'll find that it won't take long to heal. Now, if you start adding all these kind of antiseptics, you might find it will take longer because you're adding toxins that the body will then need to actually clear out. So you don't need to put antiseptic to kill the bugs, because the bugs aren't the problem. If somebody does a test and they find bacteria there, that's good, because the bacteria are helping the cleaning and the repairing and the restoring of and the body's healing processes. So they're part of the clean-up crew.
I get.
I know it's a complete inversion of what we've been told.
It is, and you got to get. When I broke my leg in 1995, and I had to have metal plates. I had to have bone graft and bone tape from my hip to repair the tibia, and a big Meccano set with 10 bolts going through to bolt it all together and all that sort of stuff. Right, did a great job. Thank God for orthopaedic surgeons. I would have never walked again. In 2010, I was struggling. It was really inflamed, it was really hot, and it was hurting when I was walking. So I went to see the surgeon, a consultant surgeon, different one this time because it's so long later, it's in Bath. And he said, we need to take those metal plates out now. Your muscles kind of congealed around the screws or the bolts, and when you're moving your knee, it's hurting. So we need to get that out. There's a 1% chance of infection. Now, he kept reiterating that to me. right up until the point when I was laying on the bed ready to go into the theatre, and he walked in, and he was all gowned up and he was all washed up, and he said, and he looked down at me and said, "Okay, this is what we're going to do," and run through it all again, and said 1% chance of infection. Right, and I just remember me saying, oh, 1%. It's got to happen, right? Now, if I'd have been in Africa in unsanitary conditions, with a surgeon that hasn't washed his hands, and I had that surgery, surely there's a higher chance of me getting an infection.
Not infection. There is a higher chance of having of the body needing to do more work to clean things up. Yes. So, but that wouldn't have been infection.
Clean what up?
If the surgeon, like you say, the surgeon's got sort of dirty hands, it's nothing to do with germs. It's not the germs. So when you say dirty, it depends what you mean. I mean, let's say he was wearing gloves, but I wasn't in a theatre that was as sterile as one we get in the West. It was less sanitary. Okay.
It was.
Again, the tools can be clean. It doesn't require disinfectant or whatever, because the germs aren't the problem. Now, again, because if there's some kind of inflammation, that will be because the body's healing. These are part of the healing processes. So, I can't say necessarily that, as you say, somewhere in Africa they would have less ability. But I understand.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm just,
because if there's different operations, because he said 1%, they must have done some sort of statistical analysis, I'm assuming. If you have this type of operation and your leg's going to be open and we're going to be pulling metal plates out your knee and the screws are coming out your bones, that means your bones are going to be exposed to the air and there's things flying around in the air. And although we've got a sterile environment here in the theatre, there are still things that get through the filters or the whatever as we do, and there's a 1% chance that they might get in your bone and you might have a problem. That's what the guy was saying to me.
Exactly.
And it seems.
It does. It does seem to make sense, and that's why they've, if you like, got away with it for so long, because it does make sense. But it's not the bugs flying around in the air getting into your body that's the problem. It could, and again, I have no idea. I can't see this is. This is why it's such a problem, because people say, well, if it's not that, what is it? And there is no single one answer to actually replace the old infection, because there's all sorts of things that happen, as you say, sterile, but at the same time they're using lots of chemicals, they're using lots of toxins, and the chemicals could be toxic to the body because they're not natural. So the body will then to kind of want to clear them out at some later stage, and depending on how healthy the person is in the first place as to how strong their, and I won't call it an immune system because it's not, how strong their body is and how strong their repair and maintenance system is in clearing away those toxins. Now, if the person isn't as healthy, it may take longer, and then there could be inflammation around the healing. So again, the redness around healing is also, it's inflamed. Oh, that's a bad thing. Although when you look at the medical establishment kind of definitions, they recognise inflammation is part of the healing process sometimes, and other times it's the cause of something. So again, they confuse people.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not qualified in any of this, but I just you try and understand it as best you can. But so inflammation, as far as I can tell, is like if it gets too far, then it's the body working against itself. So that's when it develops like cancer or multiple sclerosis or arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. Inflammation in the joints and stuff is because the body's now started to react against something and there's been so many theories. I mean, years ago, and this is why I'm careful, Dawn, right? And I think everybody should be. I want a lesson in critical thinking, really, that we can have these kinds of discussions and thrash them out without, fighting from one camp or the other, right? It's about trying to get to the truth, as we discussed before when we chatted. I remember somebody telling me years ago that aluminium causes Alzheimer's, and I was like, well, that makes sense. Everybody cooks with aluminium, and you've got your food and this, that, and the other. And then you listen somewhere else, and some guy says, yeah, but there's 8% of the planet's covered in aluminium. Aluminium's everywhere. And then And you go, oh, yeah, but surely it's toxin in the body. And they go, yeah, but nature has developed these liver and the kidneys, right, and the lungs to expel toxins, right? It's like the airport scanner when things go through, right? The liver's filtering and saying, right, we've got to get that out, and the gut's got these mechanisms like the microbiome to feed that. You know, the whole reason that we get a lot of toxins out of our body is because of these incredible organs that we've got that do a fantastic job. As long as we're healthy, as you say, if there's ill health, that's when you start to degrade, and that's when it seems that to me, that's when doctors are sort of going, well, it could be this, or it might be that, we're not sure, we need to run some more tests and do some more lab work, and we find this and that, and then sometimes you seem to go years. I've heard loads of people tell me years, the doctors don't know what's wrong with me, but I've got all these symptoms and so on and so forth. So I understand that grey area where they don't seem to be able to get a diagnosis, and there seems to be a vacuum then of a lot of theories, particularly with social media out there now, that will jump in and go, right, it's this then, and what you need to do is detox with our special program that's going to cost you £100 a month with your, do you know what I mean? And it makes it worse, doesn't it, for ordinary people to try and get to the truth of what the bloody hell's wrong with me and why am I not feeling well, and it's complex. It's complex, like we said, touched on earlier. The psychology, the trauma that you've had as a child can be affecting your health now, and these are deep things that are not readily available. You ain't going to get a pill for them. And I get that people that peddle pills don't want you to worry too much about what trauma you had in there, unless they come up with a pill for it, right? And they want you to focus on for business, right? Oh yeah, okay, that's the shit way the world works. But when someone like yourself comes along and says, look, you know, germs are bacteria, you know, these don't exist, and it goes against sort of 300 years of doctor friends of mine have been studying and firmly believe in, then all we can do is owe it to ourselves to go, okay, that's interesting, let's question it, let's test it. And that's what we're doing now in a healthy and respectful way, I think.
We are indeed, and I'm not trying to push anything. I'm sharing the information that I've gathered in many years of research that is also supported by many other people who have conducted similar research. I would also say in our book, part of the research involved getting evidence, or that's not evidence, some of the people who were contemporaries of people like Louis Pasteur, Robert Koch, or who were, you know, around somewhat slightly later than them, again, where there were scientists, and a lot of them were medical doctors as well. And they looked into this so-called germ theory, and they said that, you know, there's no evidence for it. So it's not just suddenly we're all saying it. It's not suddenly. If you start looking through the historical records, or, you know, various books and papers that have been written over the past 150 years, you know, going back to the time of Louis Pasteur, I think it was 1860 something that his theory first came out. You know, if you go back, there were plenty of people who were saying, who were critical of what they were saying, and they said that they couldn't find the proof. So the burden of proof is on someone who proposes a theory, and we're saying, can you show us the proof? Because what you've put forward...
One more example.
Yes?
Sorry. SARS-CoV-19.
Yeah.
They say it come from a fish market. People are going, hang on a minute. There's a virology lab down the road, 300 yards from there. Surely, you know, if chocolate was found all over the streets and there was a Cadbury's factory down the road, you wouldn't say it came from the fish market. You'd say the likely source of the chocolate all over the roads has got to come from the chocolate factory, right? Yeah. So, okay, so we've got the lab theory, conspiracy theories. It never came from the lab. Don't be stupid, right? So then the NIH changes the definition. When journalists start to investigate, they go, oh, hang on a minute. The Americans are sending the Chinese labs money to do research on these viruses that they're finding on bats. And you go, oh, really? Yeah. And they're doing gain of function research where they try to see if it can change the virus to change from going from animal to animal to animals to humans, right? It's called gain of function research. So then the NIH or whatever it is come out and change the definition of what gain of function research is, right? This is some testimony of some guy was given to Congress the other day, and he was asked, why did you change the definition? He said, oh, well, the public were a bit confused about what gain of function research meant, and so we had to clear that up and, get it all out there clear, right? So you go, okay, let's take a couple of steps back. What are they looking at then, and what are they testing and changing as a gain of function if there are no viruses?
That's a very good question, and because I have no idea what they're doing in their laboratories, I don't know, but they're working from the basic assumption that there are these things called viruses that cause disease, and they're manipulating something or other in their experiments. I would say they're kind of moving towards the whole genetic side of things now.
Well, some of the conspiracy people were saying at the beginning, when it came out, they were censored, these people. I watched a woman, I was in Mexico, as working then, and we were putting it on the news every night. But the head of the studio was like gung-ho about the pandemic, like full on every night, watching videos in China of people falling over in the streets and all the spraying of the streets and the whole, the whole debacle that went on, right? And so we were looking, and there was there was a woman, I can't remember her name, a doctor who came out initially and said, this virus is genetically modified. This has been made. This isn't a natural virus, right? Which brought up the whole thing about gain of function. Well, they must have had something to genetically modify.
Well, that's the theory. The point is that if they've never truly isolated any of these things that they call viruses, then you can't genetically modify something that you've not proven to exist. And that's the whole point of why I kind of mentioned the agenda, because it's keeping people in fear and say, well, it's not a natural virus, it's a man-made one. And this keeps everyone fighting, and at the risk of being one of those conspiracy theorists, you have to have evidence that the thing exists in nature, out in the wild, seen on its own, so you can say, right, this is the cause of something. Until that has been done, and a lot of us have been looking. But didn't they do that in the pandemic? When they said, we've isolated the SARS COVID-19 virus, here's its genetic code. The genetic code was mapped in different countries. So either all those people were involved in a conspiracy, or they've all got something badly wrong. But that's where I struggle. Yes, they've got something badly wrong, and that's because of their training. In the same way as if you're trained in... you're taught in your training of whatever it is that you're learning. If you're taught something or other, you think that is what is the case because you're being taught. And when you spend years learning and you're in the laboratory and you're doing all these different experiments and you're told that result means X, Y, Z, and then you have all these bits and pieces and it's... The point is... Yeah, sorry, I'll finish. So you have all these bits and pieces and you that's what it means, and you keep playing with these experiments and these chemicals and these different things, and you have these wonderful machines that cost huge amounts of money, and you've got this fantastic lab, and the only way you get money is by doing this type of research, because if you look into research that's about real health, you won't get supported. You won't get any funding. So it's all about funding in a particular direction, and that's why the kind of agenda thing is relevant, but I'll stay away from that for the time being. It's when you are taught something, that is what you believe is how it works, and so you just keep in that field and keep doing these experiments.
So the leap then to get to where we are with this agenda is that initially Koch and Pasteur got it wrong. That germs, bacteria, viruses and parasites, microorganisms are not the reason that people get sick. And you say the people get sick as a way of recovering. The symptoms of the sickness are their body healing itself, and if you leave it on its own, those things will go away and the person will recover.
Most what are called acute conditions are self-limiting, and if you look after your body, hydrate, rest, but some of the kind of basic things, your body will recover on its own. Yes, as I say, the sort of acute conditions. And there was something I was going to go back to, but I'll
sorry, I was going to go from that to so they got it wrong. And then there's a whole body of evidence medical practice that's gone on since then. We're talking several hundred years, assuming that basic premise of the germ theory, the bacteria, the parasite, the virus is the causative agent, and medical science has gone along on that faulty assumption to the development of pharmaceutical solutions and other solutions, which have become vested interests in businesses. Tell me where I'm trying to say what you're saying, right? So tell me if I'm getting it wrong. And those vested interests have now got to the level where they are making shit up about viruses to do what to us?
Well, the starting point of saying that, Pasteur and Koch got it wrong, they made incorrect assumptions.
Right.
But those assumptions were obviously useful for the establishment to then make it so that they can control the health system. So it's to say they're making stuff up is I'm not prepared to say they're making it up. What they're doing is they are following the procedures that they are taught, and they just keep following the procedures, and they do these different bits, and they're playing with all these different chemicals and getting what what they think are certain reactions. They interpret those reactions or interactions, and then they analyze whatever it is. The important point is that what they're doing in the laboratory is getting further and further removed from anything to do with our body. And the important massive part that they are missing is the role of emotions, consciousness, mind, ideas, beliefs. Exactly.
Right.
So
let's get on to that then.
The Gabor Mate part, because they are taking. He's unfortunately he actually believes in infections. So he.
Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect. No, it's fine. It's just that
I love Gabor Mate. He's my hero.
I think he's great too, and I've. When the Body Says No it's a great book. It's I love his stuff. It's just that I'm not recommending it, because if people read his work or listen to him, they'll find that he still believes in infections and infectious diseases. But that's the same. I'm keeping that. So keep that to one side. But yes, you're quite right, because that is it is such an important component, and it's missed. Yes. It's completely missing from these little experiments that they're doing in their petri dishes, and they're adding different chemicals. None of what they're doing in their petri dishes has got anything to do with what's in the human body.
So essentially, if I put this in this way, right? Tell me if you agree with this statement. They are told to test for firemen because there's a fire, and when they find firemen over and over again, they say it's the fireman. Is that fair?
In very simplistic terms, yes.
Of course, I want to simplify it as much as possible. Yes. I mean, nobody would accept that. I think that I'm trying to say that virus is a fireman. But
you see, but the assumption. No, I mean it's okay to say the bacteria are firemen, because you see bacteria, you see firemen. Okay. Viruses, hypothetical. Nobody's ever seen them. You see, it's not even calling. Not even. I know. It's
because
tough.
they've. I mean,
they've indoctrinated us. Don't sneeze on me. I don't know germs.
Well, that's different from these people saying, that example I gave earlier with the SARS-CoV virus, that where there's people going, we've looked at the genetic code of this virus, and it's been altered. It's been manufactured in a lab, and those people from that lab went to a bat cave, and they got bats, and they got things that are on the back of these bats, and they took them to a lab, and they isolated them, and they experimented on them and created a hybrid virus. They say. So they say, right. So so they're either saying that they well, hang on, let me clear my mind on this, right? They're either working on something that doesn't exist, as you say, right? Well, then what are they working on? What did they genetically modify if there isn't such a thing? And if they did, then what is it if it's not a virus?
Huge questions. The first one, they they can't you're quite right, they can't genetically modify something that they don't actually have on its own, you know.
Right.
So they've got to have, you know, if they're going to genetically modify a mouse, you've got to have a mouse.
Yes.
There is no virus that they have isolated totally on its own that they can genetically modify. Now, the other thing is that part of this process involved the PCR, which is the polymerase chain reaction. What that does is it doesn't tell you whether you've got a virus or whether you're ill. It's got nothing to do with the health. What it does is it amplifies genetic material, and it does it exponentially. So you end up just making a lot of what was there in the first place. But they can, during those processes of amplification, I'm trying to keep this simple again, because I'm not an expert in this field at all. I know somebody who's
and I'm assuming most of our listeners won't be. So I want to say,
I'm going to keep it as simple as I can to just make the point. So when they're amplifying these bits of genetic material, they can actually have what may be called mutations, although it's not something that is mutating in the way we understand it. So they may have different parts. So as they get further down the amplification, so you've got you've got millions of these pieces of genetic material, you've then got slightly different codes. You've got a slightly different code from somebody else who's doing something similar that doesn't have those slight mutations in it. So because they end up being slightly different, they say, oh, that's a variant. That's been genetically modified. That's where the whole variant thing came from, because they had these two different kind of processes that ended up with slightly different genetic sequences. So genetic information.
So what is it that's mutating?
There's nothing. It's not actually mutating. What they're doing is they're amplifying the genetic material. It's a process.
Yeah, but the
it's a
genetic
mechanical
material of what?
Well, that's it. And that's the other problem, because they don't start with the isolated virus. So what they're doing is, or what they're using is the goop from their cell culture experiments. And they're amplifying genetic material from that.
Okay.
And so that part of that comes from the human body. Now, who knows what else is in there? It's also from the fetal bovine serum. So that's an animal product. So there could be genetic material from there. From the vero cells, which are monkey kidney cells, again, there will be genetic material in that. So the genetic material that they're amplifying isn't necessarily from any one of those. It is a mixture of those sources, and that's why you get these differences.
The vero monkey kidney cells, are they using that as some sort of like activator or something with the thing to test it? Is that what it is?
That's part of the cell culture experiment. They use that as the basis. So
okay.
So that's the substance that they use, that they claim to grow the virus. Nothing is grown because viruses don't grow, but that's what they use as their basis. Right. And then they add, as I say, fetal bovine serum, which is supposedly as a feed for whatever's going in there.
So that it cultures it and grows.
So it cultures it, yeah. And then they add various antibiotics, so gentamicin, amphotericin, so antifungals, antibacterials, and various other chemicals that are causing this material to break down anyway, because they're toxic. So it breaks down. And then when they see it all breaking down, they say, oh, it's the virus that's killed the cell.
Ah, now I understand. Right. So it's at that stage when they're actually like doing the so-called isolation of it, that they're adding a load of other stuff that you dispute. That's where it changes it and says, okay, so now you've introduced all this stuff. It could be any of these things, or there's all sorts of other stuff in the goop and you're not identifying any of that. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes.
Got you. Thank you.
That's okay.
I'm hoping if it makes it clear for me, that it makes it clear for the people who watch it as well.
And the point is that virologists and people who work in these labs are taught that is isolation. And so they go, oh, that is isolation. And so they do that procedure under the assumption that it's isolation. That's why the papers say isolation of SARS-CoV-2. And people, I've looked at some, but I mean, there are lots of people Highly qualified people like Dr. Andrew Kaufman, Dr. Mark Bailey has looked at lots of papers, Dr. Sam Bailey, Dr. Tom Cowan, to name just 4 people who are medically qualified. They looked at and various other people, they looked at hundreds of studies. They looked at all the studies that came out in the beginning of 2020. They've looked at every single one of those papers that's claimed to have isolated SARS-CoV-2. When they look at the methodology, none of them actually isolate the virus. They all do the same procedure, and in no case have they got this isolated virus on its own to be able to prove that that is
the causative agent.
The causative agent, or
will
even.
You let me have links to those? I'll put them in the description below. So if anybody wants to go off and check that, verify for themselves.
I can let you have a link to Mark Bailey's. It's called A Farewell to Virology. I mean, it's an extremely detailed document.
For those people that are out there that want to do that, then
it's about 60 odd pages. It's about 60 odd pages, and
I encourage due diligence for anybody that's qualified to look at them, if they're available, because verify, isn't it?
His paper has been out for at least a year. I can't remember now when it first came out. It's as
recent as that. We're talking recent stuff.
Yes, because of the whole so-called pandemic. We've all been looking, and I mean they've been really working hard at all of this. They've been putting out lots of videos and discussions and looking deeply into it. And they've looked at all these papers, and in no paper have they been able to find the evidence that says, they truly isolated in the true sense of the word. Now, virologists will say, well, you don't get to define what isolation is, and go, well, no, isolation is isolation. If you're going to something is isolated, you've proved it to exist, then we need to see it. Show us the virus. Show us the virus. It's like show me the money.
Show me the money.
Yeah. So show us the virus, and no, they.
So
they
all right. Let's move on to the emotional stuff. But before I do, just one last question on this subject. Mm-hmm. So the cryptosporidium outbreak at the moment. Mm-hmm. People are getting sick.
Yes.
There is an outbreak. I don't think they're faking it.
Okay.
There probably are more people getting sick than they're telling us, because they've also put out an alert to say to people, don't come to the hospital unless you're really, really sick, because we don't want to put undue pressure on the NHS. So as a result of that, we know that people will stay home and puke and do whatever and not report it. So therefore, the accurate numbers of how many people have got sick won't be able to be registered, right? That's not something new. But people are getting sick. We can agree on that. If they're not getting sick from cryptosporidium, which is being identified under the microscope, we don't know what they are getting. I'm not putting pressure on you to say, well, what is it then? But why do we get these outbreaks? Because outbreaks happen all over the world, and they attribute them to something that they find under a microscope or test for, and then they do it. So what's the cause behind an outbreak? Because we're going to go on to the emotional subject now, but surely not all the people in Devon at the moment are having an emotional breakdown at the same time.
No, absolutely. There is before we go to the emotional thing, there is one thing I've made a note of, and I want to get back to. It's just a very small point. But anyway, staying with this, what it follows the terrain model. Because it's, the terrain paradigm, if you like, is because people are in a similar environment. There's something in their environment that has caused them to be ill. Now, if people are being sick, if they're having vomiting and diarrhea, that means they're taking something into their body that is toxic, and their body is saying, his body is saying, get this stuff out of me as quickly as possible, because I don't like it. So having those symptoms, if you now, I'm not giving anyone medical advice. I'm not, whatever. However, this is my understanding. Disclaimer, yep. This is my understanding of how the body works, that if it's got something kind of being put into it that it doesn't like, it will get it out. And somebody who's being sick or having diarrhea means that there's something the body really doesn't like. And that's the quickest way to expel it. So there's some kind of toxin involved. Because these symptoms aren't, and that's the other important point to make, is that if people are having these symptoms, not to take something to suppress them, because then you're pushing whatever it is back into the body, or you're keeping it in the body.
I was going to say, that's the body doing its job, right?
It is
That's
indeed.
these organs, the liver and
Yes.
everything, doing its job, getting it out of there.
Well, it's the stomach, particularly.
The stomach,
so yes, whatever. So it's clearing the system. Now the important thing is to stay hydrated and to rest, but not to take things to stop the symptoms, because the body needs to get that stuff out. And
So if you've got diarrhea, don't take Imodium.
no, and well, no. I mean, stay home, rest, and stay hydrated
Okay.
until the symptoms subside. And if you do that, so yes, with the hydration, if you do that, your body will recover more quickly. Obviously, don't drink water that then caused the problem in the first place. You need to drink clean water.
Right,
Obviously,
so let me
if
stop
it's
you
the
there.
body.
So the water is the problem, but you don't think it's the cryptosporidium that's the
No.
problem.
No.
And so theory, what is it then?
Well, I can posit a few suggestions. I cannot say what it is, and this is where it's always a problem, because people want to know this. Well, if it's not this one thing, what is the one thing? And it's not
No,
the
well, I
one
mean,
thing.
the crop circles. If I say to people, look, the crop circles are not man-made, and I believe they're not man-made largely because of this, and this, right?
Yeah.
And if I put forward that argument, usually people then say to me, well, what is it then? Aliens?
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
don't bloody know. So I understand where you're coming from for that. But nevertheless, people will always ask me that question, and I will say, I don't know, but I've got some ideas. What are your ideas?
Right. Well, I think in response to this, my ideas may be a little bit closer than the kind of the crop circle
The
thing,
alien
because
theory.
well, I mean, I don't know, because there are things that can be tested for. So one of them would be some kind of chemical. So it could be a chemical spill. It could be a sudden. So if it's in just one area, it could be something that has been released into the water supply, or something that has got into the water supply through, through some kind of chemical in the environment. They could have been a heavy use of pesticides, something somewhere that's got into the water that's ended up, coming through the treatment centre. The water treatment centres don't filter things out as well as they should, as well as they could. I mean, we're all using, filters and distillers, but they don't use, obviously very good filters, or they certainly don't distill the water at these treatment plants. So we don't know what they're using to clean the water, or they could maybe have increased whatever the toxic material is that they use to kill the germs in the treatment centre, because that's their idea. They have to treat the water, and that's the chlorine, to kill the germs, and that's no good, because we don't want our germs, our bacteria, killed. So maybe there was an increase, and I'm not saying it's the treatment centre, it's just throwing out some ideas. There would be some kind of increase in a toxic substance that has got into the water supply. And it's
but not cryptosporidium from raw sewage.
No, well, if there's raw sewage in the water, then
Well, that's what they're saying.
and like raw sewage is waste material. You don't want to put that back into the body. The body's kind of, this is.
I think we're all agreed on that.
Yeah,
But they're saying that it's the cryptosporidium bug that's in that raw sewage that's got through, that's making people sick. And you say no. I understand. Why?
No.
Why can't it be that?
Because it's not been okay. I'd say if somebody's saying it's that, please show me the evidence. If somebody's got actual genuine evidence that cryptosporidium has been proven to be the cause of what's going on, please show me the evidence. That's what I'd say. I'd ask for. Yes.
Yeah.
Based on the years of research that I've put into this topic, and not just me, plenty of other people, and the history of number of people that have looked into this that say there's no evidence. None has been forthcoming so far. There are plenty of other reasons for people to have been made to have these symptoms, which are the body expelling toxins. So yes, this is not emotional. This is obviously something that's really going on.
There's definitely something
there is
physical.
Well, in most cases, and at the same time, there is that element or potential element of what's called the placebo or the nocebo effect, because people may be reading the news and the headlines, people in that area, and recognize it, well, reading the different symptoms, and they can actually manifest those symptoms, and they say, I don't like the sound of this, is making me feel ill, and then and they can actually manifest those symptoms. So I'm not saying
I can accept that. I can accept that we know that this does happen.
It does.
It's been proven scientifically, but that's something that's been proven scientifically that you do accept, but you don't accept that the bug Cryptosporidium is necessarily the causative agent that's making people sick. It could be a host of other things that are in the water, together with people having this suggestion made to them, and then thinking, I mean, people watch things, don't they, and they think, oh, I feel sick, or you've only got to say something and people imagine it and they feel sick. So we know it has, but
so that's proven. That's proven. Definitely that's definitely exactly.
But that's proven in the same way, using the same methodology. No, it isn't, is it? Because they're looking at this bug under a microscope. But when you do the nocebo and the placebo effect, that's done with, again, double-blind studies where people think they're getting something or they don't know, and the people who are giving it to them don't know, and then afterwards they measure the results. Yeah. That methodology is the same as taking a Cryptosporidium bug, putting it in some samples and deliberately infecting some people and others, and then saying, well, those people got those symptoms and those people didn't, and we find out that those people didn't get it and those people did. That's what they say they do.
Well, maybe that's what they say they do, but I'd want to actually have a look at how they say, what their actual experiments consist of. I mean, it's a question of looking in the methodology section and what they actually do, because I've looked at so many different papers where the actual abstract.
This mixing together at the beginning, that's the bit that you've enlightened me on. That's the methodology.
So many of these papers say, if they're looking at, say, tuberculosis, for example, they say tuberculosis is caused by whatever. And you go, well, okay. And you want to keep looking back at the original evidence. I mean, as I say, there are loads of us that have been looking into it, and some much more deeply than I have in the past few years. And I mean, actually, there's something else. There's a website called Virology by
let me have a link for that
a friend, Mike Stone. I mean, he's just written. He writes these incredible articles, bringing all the documents and the study papers, putting extracts and whatever in them. I mean, he's done a fantastic job, as well as, I say, Dr. Mark Bailey on his A Farewell to Virology. And they just say, none of it's been proven. There's also the FOIA requests by a lady called Christine Massey. She's been submitting FOIA requests to, I think it's now 120 or 140 different health institutions around the world, asking them to provide the original evidence. And this includes the CDC, the NHS, and various, these big organisations.
Yeah.
And they've all come back saying, we don't have that. Now, if the CDC is saying...
Don't have what?
Don't have the documentation with the original evidence that SARS-CoV-2 or whatever else is the cause, yes.
They don't have it?
I'll send you that as well.
Yeah, please.
I'll send you that as well. So, I mean, this is not just a few kind of crackpots kind of just going, oh, well, we don't believe it. It's, there are a lot of people... who have been looking at this certainly in great detail for the last 4 years and many even longer. It's just obviously been ramped up because of what started in 2020.
Sure.
And people say, oh, well, why is it important to know there's no virus and or no virus has ever been proven to cause disease? We're known as the team no virus or whatever. It's because they are. And this is where the agenda comes in. I mean, if you look at the BBC website, it's just full of reports of scaremongering about, measles cases are up and this, that, and the other. The bird flu that's now infecting cows and somebody got a red eye. It's just rife out there. There's so much that's being
Can't disagree with you there. It feels like that movie V, doesn't it? Where do you remember that? Have you seen that movie V? With the guy who wears that. forgotten the name of the mask. You know that mask. You know the
the anonymous mask. V for Vendetta.
Vendetta. Yeah.
Yes, I have seen that. Yes,
It's
good
taken
film.
from something. I've forgotten.
Good film.
So there's a bit in that, isn't there, where they realise, the government realise they're losing grip of the people, the control over their minds, and so they're hitting them with everything, and the water's infected, and this virus is coming, and blah blah blah. And it all started, didn't it, that from a scam pandemic, the whole premise of the movie. And there's just this memorable bit in the middle where they're in the pub, guys are just standing in the pub, and the TV news is going on, and it's just one fear-mongering thing after the other, and one of the guys looks at his mate and says, do you believe this shit? It feels like that right now. I think a lot of people agree. You know, it's nuclear wars coming, Israel and Iran's going to get involved in that. We could all die from that. There's going to be a cyber attack, and this virus is coming, and get ready for the next pandemic, and bird flu's going to get you. And I cannot disagree with you there. The media is on overdrive with fear-mongering right now. And then we've got social media, haven't we, that's played to our negativity bias that gets all the views. If you put, you know, if I put a headline title on this podcast and said Gary King destroys Dawn Lester's argument, it would get more bloody views because you put destroys than if you just put, you know, we have a nice conversation. And so people have played up to that.
Yeah, it's the big headline, the propaganda, you know, and the more fear that's ramped up. And so people get to a sort of, you know, saturation point, and then so they have to ramp it up to get the to get the views,
to get the click.
Yeah. At the same time, it's important that the other factor we were going to go back to, the emotional, psychological aspect. And that's why it's important to make it clear that there's no evidence that any of these viruses or you know, well, the virus has never been proven to actually exist as described. Bacteria, fungi and parasites have never been proven to be the cause of disease. The reason for this message being so important, in my opinion, is that it just takes away all that fear-mongering and go, okay, that's what they're saying, I can ignore it. Whereas if we all think that, you know, these diseases, these germs, whatever, are out to get us, and we need all these vaccines, we need to take all these medicines, you know, that's actually, well, it's the fear-mongering, but also then taking the vaccines, which have never been proven to be safe or effective either. And again, that's the point. The whole vaccine industry falls apart when the germ theory is destroyed as well. Okay, so it is the fear. It's that fear aspect. It's the fear.
That's it. So that's what you're saying.
It's
the fear aspect that's playing, and so like you touched on earlier. Then the people in Devon at the moment who are getting some symptoms, you would say that a percentage of those people are getting symptoms based on the fear of the reporting rather than the actual bug itself.
I can't.
Obviously,
say I'm suggesting that it's quite likely that could be one of the factors involved.
Okay.
For some people.
Sure. So I mean, I'm in agreement with you on the whole fear-mongering thing that's going on right now in so many areas. I think it would be difficult to argue against that. But what would you say to a more balanced? Let's say someone would say a more balanced view would be if we tailed back, if the media immediately tailed back on all the fear mongering, and we didn't think we were going to war, and people weren't so stressed in their lives with worrying if they can make ends meet because of the cost of living, and were in so much bloody debt that they weren't worried about this, that and the other, and causing stress, which we know is a major contributory factor to a lot of chronic illness and death, suicide, you know, everything, right? Stress is the killer. So if the media tailed back on all the stress and life got a little bit easier for people, where they weren't so stressed out with their lifestyles and they were eating not heavily processed food that wasn't, you know, made in a laboratory and it came fresh from the farm, let's say, people would still get sick from certain bugs, wouldn't they?
Not from certain bugs, no. They may well have symptoms and because the body goes through different processes. And again, some of these could be seasonal, sort of quite often sort of, spring, kind of like spring cleaning. Sometimes your body will spring clean as well. It's just, our bodies get out of balance, they get a little bit maybe a little bit stressed or something. There would be far less symptoms going on.
I think there would definitely be far less symptoms of people getting
yes.
chronic inflammatory diseases and so on if they didn't eat the foods. And that stuff's coming out more now, isn't it? I mean, when I started talking about some of I remember in 1997 when I kind of opened up to all alternative views about what was going on, I was convinced at that time that the additives in sweets and the sugar and the stuff that they were being fed to kids in their cereals and stuff was bad, right? And so I remember saying to my family and stuff like, I don't want the kids eating these Cheerios and these cornflakes and these Frosties and all this crap, right? I want them to have a boiled egg and a piece of toast, or, I don't want that stuff that's come out of a factory going in my kid, and I don't want them eating all these bloody sweets, right? If they're going to have have a piece of fruit, and I was called a crackpot. Don't be bloody stupid, the government wouldn't do this, that, and the other. Now, people know, and this is the thing, right? I wonder about the sugar companies, because they've bloody known for years that sugar feeds cancer cells. It causes so many problems in the organism, sugar, on so many levels, and yet it comes from the old slaves trade. That it's been a drug, and it's highly addictive, and they know it. Right, they've pushed this on us for years and years and years, and directed all research away from could sugar be the cause of age. So, I'm with you on all of that stuff. I think I want to try and make it clear for myself and for the viewers about the whole: is there germs and not germs? Is there something in what they're saying, or is it all completely nonsense? Because that's where people sort of shy away from being presented with this information. If someone comes along and so radically says that's all bollocks, right? That's all the things for 300 years you've been told doesn't exist. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Oh, absolutely. That's why 4 years plus, and we're still going, and a lot of people still are struggling with this concept. The reason I can say it with the confidence is, from the years of research I've put into it, and also the fact that that's how I live. I don't have fears of germs, and so I actually don't manifest those symptoms. If I get a runny nose or get a headache or a sniff or a cough or whatever, I don't think, oh my God, I've got a cold. I just think, oh, okay, I need to rest my voice. I'm, clearing something out. I just, increase the hydration. I know what's going on. I trust my body, and I don't get stressed by it. And that alone is comforting, empowering, and takes away the, so I don't go running to any pharmacy to, take anything to stop it, because I know it's, I trust my body to do what it's doing. And that takes me, which I really do want to make this one point, which is about the body attacking itself, what's called autoimmune diseases. Or the body is not stupid. It does not attack itself. The immune system doesn't attack itself. It wouldn't do. The body is far more intelligent than we've been made to believe, which keeps us in the kind of the victim mindset, and that we can't take responsibility for our own health, which is the name of the game. That's the objective, to keep us feeling powerless, hopeless, helpless, so that we'll then defer to this medical system and go there so we can do whatever we want with our lives, and then go to them to fix us with some kind of pill or medicine or something or other of some description. I know that sounds really simplified, and but that's really, health actually is simple. It's as you said, kind of good food, decent food, clean water. Try and avoid, just be careful of the products you use. Try and avoid the chemicals if you can, and it's getting easier to find more natural products, whether it's what you use on yourself in the home, those kinds of things. Kind of minimize your exposure to EMFs where you can, and the big factor is to try and reduce the stress where you can. Also to have a look at, because I know Gabor Mate's work is involved with trauma, sort of traumas. And again, that's a whole other big topic. But it's understanding that the way we are brought up, this whole society, the way we're brought up is in a certain way, make it with certain beliefs that are not beneficial for us. And so that's what this time is all about, to help us understand that we are more powerful, we can take responsibility, we can heal these traumas, and we shouldn't be allowing ourselves to be separated and dividing, because that's all the conflict. But a lot of these conflicts can't be resolved because we've got all this built up trauma, and so people are reacting and really sort of being triggered, and they're just battling each other and saying, oh no, you're wrong. And so that's why I really appreciate this conversation, knowing where you're coming from. And I'm putting my perspective, in a way it's my perspective, at the same time it's based on years of research that led to the book, and also the fact that it's not just me, there are lots of us looking at it, and minds that are far sharper than mine, really intelligent people that have been studying it far more deeply than I have. My perspective is putting it together with the whole sort of trauma and stress and the emotional psychological aspect, because that is really key. And exactly as you said, if this stress was taken away, if this fear, actually no, it's not the stress, if people's fear of these germs disappeared, just imagine, it's like, the BBC can put out, oh, well, whatever it is, and everyone does it, yeah, okay, and carried on with their day, and don't go running down for the latest vaccination or worry about, because their child has a rash, you go, oh, okay, that's okay, just stay calm, stay quiet, stay hydrated, just, it's your body doing what it needs to do, and that's fine, and so the parent isn't stressed, the child isn't stressed, the whole thing then is not a stressful situation because it's not coming from the basis of fear. Just imagine how powerful that would be from our perspective. And that's
on that thought, I'm going to ask you some more questions, but I really need to go for a pee. Right, we're back. Okay, the emotional trauma thing. I'm doing a lot of work at the moment on this whole shadow stuff, and I've sort of, I started to read Carl Jung back in '97 when I first started to change my life. Really, that was the year that everything changed for me, and it was I was introduced to it then, and the whole idea of archetypes and trauma and the unconscious and the collective unconscious and all these things was totally new to me, really. And it's taken a number of years to sort of go around the spirals of growth that we sort of, that side of us goes through, and and every now and again it comes back and you go, oh right, I get it now, because life experience fits into the theory, and I get, oh yeah, right. So I'm going through a period at the moment where that stuff's coming back around in my life, and I'm re-examining it, and my understanding of some of the concepts are deepening, because I can relate. That's the only way we really understand things, isn't it, when we relate to stuff? And so that's where Gabor Mate and childhood trauma and it being the cause of for example, I know that I might feel like my body might feel stiff, right? And I'm, oh God, I feel a bit old, right? And then I'll have a think about some stuff, or have a conversation with a friend and make a breakthrough about something I was emotionally looking at in the wrong way. And my body's not stiff anymore, right? So I'm totally on board, and I've practiced Kung Fu and Tai Chi, and understanding the whole thing about Chi and the way that it affects our body and our mind and stuff like that. I'm totally on board with a lot of that stuff, and that's why I'm in agreement with you with what's going on with the media, with fear and fear mongering at the moment. And so I guess where I've got some difficulty with accepting totally what you're saying is that there's some doubt around the area of for me, some doubt around the area of what causes illnesses like the outbreak in Devon or the COVID virus thing that someone genetically modified and changed, or they didn't, or they got it wrong, or do you know what I mean? And I think that's where, if I'm feeling it right, I'm thinking that's where people would probably also have difficulty, right?
I understand entirely, because it is such a shift in the paradigm, and that it's really difficult for people to go, sorry, pardon.
Yeah.
And it is a big shift. It's just, I don't know how to say it any other way.
Yeah, get you. No, well, that's been the whole purpose, and it's try and clear that up with this conversation as best we can. Okay, so let's wrap it up then.
Okay.
The emotional stuff and the trauma stuff, how much of that is responsible for illness in people as a percentage, would you say, roughly?
I would say it would vary for each person, because again, like you were saying about the shadow work, I mean, that's never over. That just no, I mean, that just is an ongoing. It takes different forms, and as you grow and you learn and you expand your understanding, and then you'll find some more stuff to deal with, and then it's not that it's always as hard, because I've had some pretty dark nights of the soul. I hope I don't always have to do it that way, but at the same time, I'm aware of, like you say, just sort of looking at different things and do, oh, okay, and you find something else, that an emotion or something triggers you that you think, oh, there's something I need to look at here. And instead of just going at the person who triggered you, you actually say, oh, okay, and that's what's missing from society now. We aren't taught this. We aren't, and we kind of have to find it out some other way, but we're not given this information. So for the most part, the population, in many people say this, and again, just be careful. I'm not saying it to upset people. Disclaimer: we aren't encouraged to grow up. We stay adult children because we are kept in a state of deferring to authority. We believe in external authorities. We don't take responsibility for ourselves.
I agree.
And that is an emotional immaturity if we're kept in that. And that's done on purpose throughout the schooling system to keep us believing in these other people and not trusting ourselves, and we're made to feel less than and not good enough, and that we have to get the right answer, and if you don't get the right answer, it must be the wrong answer, which is why this kind of conversation of saying, I can't tell you, which is where I'm leading to, I can't tell you why people in Devon are ill. I can make some suggestions.
Sure.
Unfortunately, because they are concentrating on this cryptosporidium, they are not, nobody is going to, well, I'd like to think maybe somebody is, but nobody's going to be looking at doing a chemical. They're not going to be looking at toxicology.
Got you.
Have a look at the state of the water, see if what toxicology is going on. At the same time, if they're talking sewage, these are waste products. And they're not, it's a waste, and that's one of the reasons way back in the old days when, before they had virology experiments and studies and all that kind of stuff, it was, back in the sort of smallpox era, which is the first so-called kind of infectious disease, it was the hygienic, the sanitation, the clear up of the sanitation, or the implementation of sanitation measures to clean up the human waste and the animal waste or whatever from the environment that made things clean. Nothing to do with germs, but clean. And that's when it was actually Leicester in this country. They did an experiment. They had a sanitation engineer, and they did all kinds of they introduced sanitation measures, and the rate of so-called smallpox went down in that area, because what they did was they cleaned up. So what's called smallpox, it's just eruptions on the skin, and that's just another mechanism for the body to clear toxic material, to expel the rubbish, because the body absorbs through the skin, but it also eliminates through the skin. I mean, it's a major elimination
Yeah,
organs.
so-
So
yeah.
that's what these boils and bumps and lumps and rashes and all these different things are given these different names. Oh, this type of rash is this. No, just the body expelling maybe different kinds of substances. So again, it's not that you've got a disease; it's the body doing its own thing, and this is why it's so massive, because it's such a shift. It's like, oh, the body's stupid; it can attack itself, or it just, well, stuff happens. It's either germs, genes, or just bad luck. No, we can take responsibility. And I'm not blaming, I'm not doing the blame thing, it's not that. It's just when we understand that, it's empowering, and then we take responsibility, and then we start changing things for ourselves. And that's how you can actually notice that there is an improvement when you start improving. And it's also, and this is the psychological aspect of it, because you're starting to care for yourself, you're starting to apply self-care. You're loving yourself, taking responsibility, and that has a beneficial effect, not just physically but psychologically as well, and mentally and emotionally. So
I think
it's
a lot
a feedback.
of people agree with that these days, for sure.
The more you take care of yourself, and you're kind of like, oh, I feel good, and you take more care of yourself, and so this has a kind of a sort of an ongoing beneficial effect. But also knowing the placebo-nocebo effect, understanding that you can be made to fear something and actually manifest those symptoms. It's just incredible, and it is proven. I mean, it's been said, some people in a clinical trial for a chemotherapy drug, people actually manifested certain symptoms like sickness or hair loss or whatever, and discovered that they were actually in the placebo group. So they weren't taking anything that should have manifested.
We know it works. That's why they do double blinds, isn't it? Because
Exactly.
they know about the effect. I get that. What you were saying earlier about this tension between the old views and the new views, right? Something I was reading recently. I'm doing some research for a guest that's coming on the podcast shortly. Who's got a degree and a master's degree in Jungian psychology, so he's up there. So I'm doing my due diligence and reading some of his work, and he puts something so lovely in a passage I read recently, which made me go, aha. It was about the ego self and the unconscious self, right? And that the ego self is this thing that we form as our identity as we go through the world. And then there's the unconscious self, which is the kind of more real self, because it's, as Jung would say, it's connected to the larger collective unconscious and so on. And he talks about the tension existing between the identity, the ego self, that doesn't want to change, and the self, the unconscious self, that's constantly wanting to grow and change, us to grow, which is why we tend to reflect on what came in the first part of our life, in the second part of our life, and change things around and look at them from a different perspective, because there's this push from the unconscious that makes the ego go, you were wrong to think that way, and you should question maybe what your assumptions are, and so on. And so the internal struggle that we have in transforming our worldview from one thing for another, and it happens all the time, not just with these subjects, obviously with lots of subjects. The crop circles is a bigger one in those senses, right? But you see that dynamic playing out, don't you? You see it individually with ourselves when we're doing our own work, that there's this part of us that is rigid and doesn't and resists change, and will argue irrationally against something in our own internal dialogues. And then we see it obviously with the tension in the world if we go out to somebody and say, hey, have you thought about this from this perspective? And you see this unconscious cognitive bias coming out of people as a knee-jerk reaction that won't accept data, that won't look at data, that won't hear any arguments, and will come out with often quite ridiculous retorts to stuff that's put to them. So the reason I'm saying all of this is that I consider that we are going through a transformation as a species, right? And that a lot of the things that are happening right now with regards to the news being what it is and people trying to maintain control and holding on to that control by keeping us in fear and all that sort of stuff, is kind of like a natural process of us giving birth to the fact that we are a larger part of something that's all connected, and that we all need to get to the point individually and collective to kind of realize that, and that you know, an individual and a collective transformation can only take place when we really do realize it for ourselves. And it's these kinds of subjects that we need to bring up again and re-examine and put the cards on the table and say, okay, what do we know? What can we speculate? What are we not sure about at all? And then what we don't know, obviously, and there's always going to be a backdrop of the unknown that we're moving in to try and understand and put light onto, and we're in the dark of. But what we do know and what we can wrestle with, all we can do is wrestle with it honestly and with good conscience, like we've been doing for the last 1 hour and 45 minutes. Which has been a pleasure, Dawn, hasn't it? To you know, I want my podcast to be a kind of an example of how we can thrash things out and try and understand better where somebody's coming from, rather than hold a stance on one particular view and try and fight and win the argument. Because
that's the point I was going to sort of come back to, because I mean, if we've got a couple more minutes, because it's that kind of, if you like, ego self, where we've been brought up to kind of, well, either you're right or you're wrong. So because I know this, or I think I know this, then because what you're saying is different, then you must be wrong and I must be right. And it's the inability to think critically. Not, I say maybe inability is not the right word, but we're not encouraged to think critically, and so that's not that's a bit of a sort of, you know, weak muscle, because you know, it's not something, and we're not taught, or rather we're discouraged from questioning, so you know, to ask questions. And that's one of the things to start a decent conversation, is to say, well, okay, I say X, Y, Z, and you say, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. And you say, oh, what about this? And I say, oh, okay, that's interesting, tell me more. And we have an open discussion, and I can say, well, from what I know, I found out this, so that kind of contradicts what you've said. I mean, not contradicts, but challenges. It raises doubt. So let's actually have a look at this, and have a look at this together. And so I'm not saying I know everything, not in any way, shape or form. All I'm offering is the information that I found over the course of years of research. Now, as I say, if somebody comes up with some evidence, you know, that would be pretty amazing, but I'm open to it. I'm not saying I'm right, everyone's wrong. It's not that at all. I'm saying this is what we found. And there are plenty of people, it's not just me, and it's not about conspiracy theorists. These people are, you know, very rational, and they are quite happy to have these discussions with whoever wants to come along, and quite often the virologists say no thank you. You know, because they don't want their ego challenged. You know, they've put years of study into something that somebody said, well, actually, I'm not sure if what you've learned is correct. It doesn't seem to be supported by what happens in the real world. And that's, understandably, that's going to challenge them. So the cognitive dissonance is very real, very understandable. At the same time, do you want to stick with what you think you know, or are you open to hearing? Are you open to finding something new? And we're in this place where a lot of people aren't prepared to even have the conversation. And so I really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation. And I haven't, you know, and as I say, I'm not trying to convince you. However, I'm just trying to show you the weight of evidence, or rather the weight of evidence of to support what I'm saying, and also the complete lack of evidence to support what the mainstream view, you know, this whole germ theory idea.
Well, I think that's probably more of what you've said, actually, that there's a lack of evidence of what they're saying, rather than I haven't seen much evidence that your theory is correct, because basically what you've said is it's that it could be a bunch of other things. So there's more of, that's a way I've taken what you said, there's more of a kind of an ambiguity area that could be other things. You've been specific about the fear and the emotional state and the way that people have got agendas and stuff. I'm clear about that. But for me, I am, and that's why I asked you to give me those links, because I think people that may be watching and listening to this podcast will want to go off and do their own research into what these people are saying. And what I'd love to see, did you see recently, I don't know if you, I think I mentioned it to you when we chatted before, that Joe Rogan hosted a podcast with Graham Hancock and, oh God, I always remember his name, Flint Dibble, his name is. He's an archaeologist from Cardiff University who's been quite vicious in some ways in his attack of the Netflix show Ancient Civilizations that Graham Hancock produced. And I've been heavily involved. I've got a lot of friends in the so-called alternative archaeology fields who posit a lot of they come across in the same way as you're coming across, right, Dawn? They say, okay, Egyptologists say that the pyramid at Giza was built in 20 years. We know that the rock came from 500 miles away, and we know that they say that they built it with copper chisels and rocks and rope, right? And that they heave-hoed these big granite slabs, and some of it's not all granite, but they and there's 2 million of them in the Great Pyramid at Giza, and they carved them, dragged them, and put them into place over 20 years is what Egyptologists say that the Pyramid at Giza was built. So you go, all right, let's do the maths, right? There's 2 million blocks, 20 years. That means they quarried, carved, dragged, and put into place each block every 2 minutes, right? Just doing the simple sums, you go, well, that's got to be bollocks. There's no way.
In a nutshell. Yeah.
Right? In a nutshell, right? I'm a Cockney. This is how we used to say things, right? That's got to be bollocks. And then if you get a copper chisel and a rock and you hit these rocks with the copper chisel, it doesn't actually do much because copper's quite soft. And so there's a problem, right? And there's also a problem with lots of other things around these ancient monuments around the world which points towards a more advanced, sophisticated knowledge and understanding on the part of these people who could do things that we can't even do today with our modern technology and machinery, right?
Absolutely.
And so this has been seen as fringe by mainstream archaeology. This has been seen as nonsense, and they've done everything they can to make ad hominem arguments against the people who put forward these alternative theories, such as Graham Hancock, who's been one of the main proponents, but there are lots of others coming up on the show. In 2 weeks' time, I've got Marco Vigato, who's an Italian researcher who lives in Mexico City. I was going to meet up with him when we lived there, but the pandemic was on and we couldn't do it. But he's discovered all these tunnels that exist underneath the Mexican pyramids, and he's come up with lots of research that shows that there's something else going on and we need to take a look at it. Anyway, here's my point. Graham Hancock goes on Joe Rogan's show, puts forward all this stuff. Joe Rogan's blown away. Mainstream archaeology come out and attack Graham Hancock, as they've done over the years. So Joe Rogan says, okay, come on the show. Let's have a debate. Let's be grown up and have a chat and find out where we agree and where we don't agree and do this sort of stuff. They did. It went on for 4 hours and 20 minutes, and there were a few occasions where Joe was growing, I think we might have to stop for a coffee because there were emotions, right? But it carried on. And at the end of it, by no means did they come to a point where they totally agreed, and by no means did they change the view of the world in each other's minds, but they demonstrated to a lot of people who watch Joe Rogan's podcast that people can sit down and have a grown-up conversation and try and thrash out some of these areas where there are nuances to the argument, and leave shaking hands and saying, okay, we agree, but we disagree, and whatever, right? And that's, for me, Dawn, sorry, at the end of this diatribe, what I'm hoping to demonstrate with our conversation today and in my podcast is that we need to have more of these conversations if we're going to go forward, because if we just stay polarised, we're not going to move. We're going to be in trouble. We are in trouble. We need to move forward.
I agree. Can I just add one little point?
Please
when
do.
you were saying I haven't actually provided evidence, there is quite a lot of evidence out there of the harm caused by various chemicals. I mean, they don't test all the chemicals, but there are plenty of chemicals that there is plenty of evidence to show that they can cause, again, different levels, whatever, different amounts, different doses, they can cause harm.
Okay.
So asbestos is known to cause mesothelioma. So again, that's a toxic substance. There is evidence. People know that. So there is evidence for some of these other alternative factor, or not alternative. Some of these factors that I say are involved in making people ill, but it's not. It is this one thing that makes you ill. It will always be a combination, and that's why it is seen as unsatisfactory, because I'm not saying, it's this one thing. It's a whole mix of things.
Yes.
And each one of those, like you're saying, sugar is known to be harmful. All kinds of, the dyes that are used in various food additives, they're known to be harmful. They don't necessarily cause a particular condition, but they are not appropriate for the body. The body will respond in certain ways, and again, depending on the actual health of the person, it'll be different. The reaction will be different for different people depending on their own inner terrain. So a healthier person can process naturally something or other that they take in that's slightly toxic without the person even knowing, because their body is healthy. It will just push it through in the normal elimination processes, and there won't be any symptoms. So somebody who's not as healthy or has taken in somewhat a larger amount of toxic material of some description is more likely to react in a slightly more obvious way. Now, again, because it's not ever one thing, it's always a combination. That's where there isn't evidence, but they don't test the chemicals in the multiple combinations that we're exposed to them in the real world. So you can say, the various pesticides, they may cause some irritation, but you're not only ever exposed to kind of, say, one pesticide, permethrin or Roundup or something like that. It's always a combination, and these combinations are not tested. So all I'm saying is there are known factors, there are known interactions, there are known reactions. It's not that they cause a disease, but they cause the body to actually react and create symptoms, which is the body's way of healing itself.
It's like one of the things with wheat spraying, like you just said, Roundup. That's what made me think of this. Chris Van Tulian, who wrote the book about processed food recently, enlightened me when he gave a podcast to somebody or the other and said that they're not just spraying this stuff during the course of the maturation of the crop. They're spraying it at the end to actually dry it or get it in a condition where they can harvest it right at the end. And that is known to affect our gut microbiome, which is known to cause adverse effects to people. And so, those kinds of factors is I assume what you're talking about, right? This overuse of stuff for profit.
Yep. And also the pharmaceutical products that are called medicines are also part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. So people are on multiple so-called medications. It's always, as I say, it's always a combination, and each one on their own, or maybe a few, might not cause any problems. But it's the not just the kind of the combination, but also the accumulation, within the body, and eventually the body kind of says, I can't do this, and we'll have a purge of some description, and that's when the symptoms, and people take stuff to suppress, and then that pushes it all further down, and then that develops into chronic conditions. So there is evidence for what I'm saying, but not specific for each individual substance.
Well, also it's new, isn't it? I mean, the ketogenic thing about, people really didn't realise how much that carbohydrates, particularly refined grains, are causing type 2 diabetes, because carbohydrates break down as sugars once they're metabolized in the body. So that, together with processed food, which contains a lot of sugar and so on, is overloading the pancreas, and so we become insulin resistant and get type 2 diabetes, put you on tablets. go onto a ketogenic diet, and lots of people have become into remission from type 2 diabetes and don't need the medication anymore. So this whole business about food being either poison if it comes from a lab and it's processed, or medicine if it's eaten in its right form, in the right balance, is true, isn't it?
Yes, I mean natural foods, substances are, the body recognizes them as food. I mean, certainly in terms of sugar, fruits are, there's sugar in fruits, but that's natural sugar, and they have cofactors that help the body digest it, and it's a slow release. Whereas the refined sugar is a straightforward release, and that's why you get these kind of spikes.
Spike in insulin.
Exactly, and that's where the problem in it. And there is a difference between natural sugar and the refined sugar. So again, it's the process. So if people were eating natural food and not processed stuff, which is a polite way of putting it, we'd all be far better off to start with. Our bodies would function better, our minds would function better, psychologically, emotionally we'd feel better. So all of these factors. So again, there is evidence. It's just there are lots of parts.
It takes a bit of work on the part of the person who really wants to know. They've got to do their work and do due diligence, because it's not there in an easy, simple answer. You're sick because of that one thing.
No, there's quite a bit of information on the problems with the environment and the food industry and various things in our book, What Really Makes You Ill. So that's one resource. I mean, I know it's like, okay, plug, but at the same time, there is, the chapter called Poison Planet, although there's one part in, I mean, do even look at things like, so-called climate change and that kind of nonsense that people are being made to believe. But that chapter 6 is called Poisoned Planet, which actually might not have been such a good idea, kind of like maybe, it's poisoned. But it's to give people the information. And so we do cover the food industry and manufactured food. I mean, it's just incredible. Once I started looking at that, the dyes, the chemicals that are in the dyes,
I know.
All of that. Once you start looking at that, you think, I don't want to eat this stuff. I mean, it's not food. It doesn't nourish the body.
There's a classic example of isolation thing, isn't it? If you I hope this is, what was I going to say? Sorry, I got distracted then because technical things going off on the left-hand side, and I'm hoping everything's okay. If you've got all these dyes and all these things that are in food, right? I remember I had an allergy test once, right? And this guy had this sort of, he was an Ayurvedic Indian doctor that I used to go and see in Cardiff. And he said, I've got this new machine. It's an allergy tester. He said, I've just bought it. I'll do you an allergy test for free just to test it, right? And it was like a pen, and it had this like device that you put these little bottles in that had this clear solution in that he picked from a whole rack of these little bottles, right? And he put it into this little slot, and then you put the pen on your thumb. And if the machine went, then whatever was in that, like tomatoes, pine nuts, whatever they were, you were allergic to, right? And if it the meter, the little gauge didn't do the thing and it stayed down low and it didn't make the buzz in the sound, then you were okay with that, right? So, okay. So he went through and he said, you're allergic to tomatoes a little bit, and you're allergic to this, and and he listed off about 5 or 6 things. And then he got these things out with E numbers, right? He had all the different E numbers in these little, I don't know how it works. And he put one in, nope, you're fine. And he did all of them, right? And he said, yeah, you're fine with all of those. You're not allergic to any of them. And I was like, really? Do me a favour, put 2 in together. Or put 3 in together, because these E numbers never come with one E number in a product. They usually come with a combination of them. He went, I hadn't thought of that. It didn't matter, Dawn, what combination he put these things in. Every single time he put 2 or more of them in, I was allergic. Gave an allergic reading. Now, I don't know how accurate this machine was. I'm not scientifically, right? But it was just, the point I was making is that the science would want to find one thing in that food and test it in isolation to see if it had an adverse effect on us. They wouldn't test what happens to us with them all together. And that's the kind of reverse of what you're saying, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, rarely do they test these things together. You're absolutely right. They'll test one, and they'll test whatever it is. Is it the LD50? The lethal dose. Anyway, that's all part of their and testing on animals as well, and they are really just trying not to look at these things in combination, because they don't want us to know that the combinations are the problem. Because we're never exposed to anything, on its own. It's always a whole combination.
No, always.
And the other thing with you being allergic, I would change that word to say sensitive.
Sensitive. Okay.
So you reacted to that. So your body was sensitive to that particular substance rather than allergic, because it's again it's just these, because it's again to do with the labels. I've got an allergy. Well, no, it's just you're sensitive to particular toxic substances, or certain things. You react.
Your body doesn't do it. Yeah.
Yes, it's just the whole idea to move away from the medical system's idea that there are these separate entities called diseases, when the terrain paradigm says that our body produces symptoms as a method of healing itself, for the most part. I mean, so again, it's a huge mind shift, but it is that way of understanding that our bodies are brilliant, they are amazing, they're interconnected, and you can't affect one part without the rest of it being affected. So and it will look after itself, and symptoms are the body's way of looking after itself. And again, it's not just the body, as we've said, we've made hopefully quite clear that the mind is involved. And again, it's like pointing to the mind, but
Sure.
Our emotions, again, our belief systems. How if we're living in fear and we believe that everything's out to get us, if we're in victim mode, again, that's the whole emotional stress side of things. So it's to turn everything on its head and say, okay, taking responsibility for the way we approach everything, and to come out of the fear. I mean, that's one of the main points of talking about this for me, is to help people not be afraid of things they don't need to be afraid of. I mean, there are things to be afraid of, but germs aren't one of them. That's my...
Dawn, you've made your position really clear, and this has been a great conversation for that.
Thank you.
It really has, in my view. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you feel that you want to say as a final kind of statement to the viewers? Is there anything you feel you've left out, or
I mean, in terms
we could go, yeah, sure. But I've taken 2 hours of your time already, so
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been absolutely fine. I mean, really, what I said is my core message, that I'm trying to help people understand that there is no evidence for the idea that these germs attack us and make us ill. And that is empowering, because it takes away the fear of something that has never been proven to be true. So that if that fear is removed, it makes such a big difference.
Got you. So your book is called...
What Really Makes You Ill. The subtitle is Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease Is Wrong, which is why I was saying diseases aren't what we're told they are, and the symptoms aren't what we're told they are. And there's, plenty of... there's a lot of information, not just about the health, like I've said, about the environment, what we eat, what we're exposed to. We cover the stress factor to a certain extent, but not in huge detail, because that would have just taken a second book of almost the same size, and it's nearly 800 pages as it is. Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, it covers the vested interest. It covers the whole the agenda, the UN, the beginning of all of that, the WHO, and as a background, as an overview, to give people the sort of the big view, the big picture view. Finishing with how we can actually take responsibility for our own health and what we can do about it. It's not definitive. It is actually for people who are who believe in the medical, or who were believing in the medical system, and start to realise that maybe that's not about health, because it's not, and want to do something about it and start finding out. So start saying, well, what really makes us ill? Well, it's a whole load of things, and there's a whole load of factors, and it's not one simple answer. So it'll be different for each of us.
Sure, it will.
So,
Dawn, thanks so much for joining me. It's been great.
thank you very much, Gary. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.